Hello, and welcome to another episode from Season 6 of The Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a passion for scary movies. Each week we pick a different horror movie and dissect it to figure out what it was trying to accomplish, how well it did, and maybe even some larger truths about why people watch horror movies in the first place. This season we're changing things up. We're devoting a whole season to reviewing Esquire's list of the 50 scariest movies of all time. In each episode, we'll break down a different movie, talk about how scary it really was, and then update our rankings to prove how much smarter we are than the other people on the internet. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the conversation. All the way back in Season 3, we did an episode on the original Frankenstein from 1931.
Yep.
And in reading about that, we ended up down this rabbit hole of pre-code Hollywood, or at least pre-code film, which was the time in between when movies started having sound and when all of like the formal regulations went into place about what content they could have. Mm-hmm. So for about 5 years, from like 1929 to 1934, there was this really interesting influx of movies that were actually a lot more racy and controversial than anything that would come out for the next several decades after. And to me, that's just a really interesting time for horror movies. Because before that, you have silent movies, and it's hard to be scary when you have to take a break and read every few seconds, because then you just get mad because you're reading. Mm-hmm. But then after that, you have the Hays Code, which outlined a bunch of stuff you couldn't do in movies. So there was just this really brief period of time when there were no adults and no rules, and filmmakers could kind of just do whatever they wanted. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting to me to see what all came out of that at the time.
Yeah, they, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head where it was, you have that little special moment in time. And I also like the fact that they were putting out horror movies during that time that were what they considered racy, for the time.
Yeah, for sure.
I kept thinking of, and I vaguely remember, I think we spoke about it when we were talking about Frankenstein. Did we ever talk about the Hays Code?
So I don't know that we ever got super into it.
Okay. We might know. Let's just touch base when I know more about it. But okay. This was before, I guess, the Hays Code took place. And so there was a little bit more freedom of the filmmakers.
Yes, definitely. It was much more like what was the audience reaction and what would the local theaters allow them to play, not any sort of overarching governing body making decisions about it.
Right, yeah.
So, yeah.
It was the golden age.
Yeah. Anyhow, all that is preamble to say that while reading about this stuff, one of the movies that I had never heard of before that just seemed to come up over and over again was Freaks from 1932. Mm-hmm. And I had never seen it or even heard anyone talk about it. So when I saw that that was on this list, that was one of the reasons that I thought the list would be a good thing to go down. And if you haven't been listening to Season 6 of the Horrific Podcast, what we've been doing is working our way through Esquire magazine's 50 scariest movies of all time, which has generally been kind of trash.
That's kind of harsh, man. I would say not good at all.
Yeah. I would say maybe half of the movies, maybe a little less than that. Like, there are some solid ones on here, but it's been some rough watches. So we are now getting into what I think of as the more interesting part of the list. So if you're just joining now, you're joining at the right time.
There's still time to get out.
True. But anyway, this week we watched Freaks. I'm going to give the introduction, and then you can give your fun facts, and then we'll get into it. In 1932, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer released the film Freaks, which was directed and produced by Tod Browning. Freaks takes place in a circus sideshow and follows the interactions between performers that include romance, deceit, and violence. This movie is notable for including real sideshow performers with deformities in prominent roles. The original version of this movie was so controversial that over a third of it was cut, and a new ending was added before it was released for wider distribution. It was made on a budget of between $300,000 and $350,000 and has had a lasting influence, being referenced in everything from a David Bowie song to an episode of The Simpsons to a whole season of American Horror Story. This movie can currently be rented for streaming on Amazon Prime Video.
Did good, kid.
Thanks, man. So I came across all kinds of fascinating things about this movie when just looking into writing that intro. So I'm very fascinated to see what you will have learned in your studies.
Yeah, it was one of those movies that you just knew facts were coming. And it just has to happen. It's an old movie, controversial of its time. Anyway, MGM wanted this movie to rival Dracula as a horror film. Let me read this to you. It might be long, but though there were certainly monstrous characters populating various silent films, particularly Chaney in The Phantom of the Opera and London After Midnight, portrayed by Chaney, the horror film as a genre didn't really take off until the era of talkies began. Shortly after Chaney's death due to complications from lung cancer, Browning was off at Universal Pictures, helping to lead the horror wave with his now classic adaptation of Dracula. When Browning returned to MGM in the wake of Dracula's success, head of production Irving Thalberg wanted to capitalize on the horror boom. The hope was that with the director of Dracula back at the studio, MGM could best Universal with something even more horrifying. And so Browning was finally given the go-ahead to make Freaks, which had remained a pet project for his years. A little bit of history, I guess.
Yeah.
In reading about this, Browning, I guess, was wanting to make the movie for quite a while. And this is finally what allowed him to do that. Another fact. So, aiming for authenticity, Browning sought real sideshow attractions and performers to play the quote-unquote freaks at the heart of the story instead of relying on movie magic, as he often had with Chaney, to portray them. Earls, who brought quote-unquote spurs to Browning in the first place, naturally came on board to play a wealthy dwarf, Hans, and enlisted his sister, Daisy, to play Hans's dwarf fiancée, Freda. For the rest of the characters, casting director Ben Piazza put out a call for photographs and on-camera tests for various sideshow performers, and apparently spent nearly months traveling the country to scout out various acts. This exhaustive search paid off, lending to a cast of memorable performers like Half-Boy, Johnny Eck, the Living Torso, played by Prince Randian, Angela Rosetto, who continued working in films for more than half a decade, or Angelo Risotto, I don't know who he played, and Schultze, who played himself in this film. Schultze actually went on to have like a very extensive career.
Yes.
In film. I actually read about how he went on and almost kind of flourished, in showbiz. And it wasn't until his manager at the time, like basically his caretaker, passed away, when they'd put him in like a mental hospital, and like his health almost immediately started declining.
Yeah.
And someone, I can't remember his name, came out, realized this, and took him back out on the road, and he lived to be like 80 years old.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Pretty crazy stuff, though.
A little bit of money, success, and partying will give you incentive to keep on living.
So in case you're wondering who Schultze is, he's the one that's wearing a dress, and they refer to him as a her in the film.
Yeah.
But he's wearing a dress, and I guess it was just kind of his thing. No hate. Okay, here's something kind of interesting. So the freaks in this film started almost getting kind of bullied by the people working the film. And there's been a couple different stories. One side is saying that the freaks were basically kind of becoming prima donnas, like as far as like even like requesting specific things that just didn't happen at that time, and like even wearing sunglasses on set and stuff. Supposedly. The other thing is so basically they were feuding and fighting the people who work on the film, and so to combat this, they let the more normal looking freaks eat food with all the other people, but then they set up a tent outside for the rest of the freaks to eat at.
Oh wow!
Which is kind of, I find it ironic because of what this film,
yeah,
kind of about.
Well, I feel like if anybody had read ahead on the script, they could have turned those tables real quick.
Exactly. You get that dude who could throw a knife.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, kind of messed up for time, but I guess segregation wasn't a thing people were against in the 30s.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's something I want to address too. Anytime we do an old movie, and I'm reading facts, you always hear about people fainting in the film.
Mm-hmm.
Like who watched the film.
Yeah.
You never hear about that anymore. So were these people just making these stories up?
Well, so my take on it is that at the time, especially like when this movie was new, people didn't have TV and they didn't go to movies. Mm-hmm. So like the idea of experiencing like a moving, talking picture was just like mind-blowing to start with. Gotcha. And it wasn't like they had not seen Star Wars Episode 1, so they had never just been to that experience like as a kid where they're like, oh, this is what bad special effects look like. What's going on the screen isn't something I need to have feelings about. They didn't get that desensitization until like, full-grown adult. Like I remember my grandpa, he used to see the Christmas Coca-Cola commercials with the computer-animated polar bears drinking Coke.
Yeah.
Blew his mind. He had no idea how they trained polar bears to do that.
Oh.
Just because he has grown up, his whole lifetime where like the thing on the TV is real. Yeah. So it just never even like occurred to him that it wouldn't be. So I think that it was probably a similar type thing, especially during this era of movie history where, most people had maybe seen like news clips or something, but the whole idea of like a talking actual movie experience, I'm sure was pretty overwhelming, especially when it was subject matter kind of more like this. You didn't have the internet to see weird stuff on to desensitize you yet.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you win this round. Okay, so audiences were scandalized by it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's the name of the movie.
Yep.
Freaks finally held the first previews in San Diego, January 1932, where the audience reactions were swift and brutal. One woman ran screaming out the theater during the movie, while another apparently threatened to sue the studio, claiming the film was so horrific it had caused her to suffer a miscarriage. It remains unclear if this was a publicity stunt.
So a woman came out of the movie and said, "Your movie killed my baby."
Yeah.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Think about the publicity with that, man.
Yeah.
Okay, two more. This technically derailed Browning's career. Before Freaks, Browning was one of the most successful directors in Hollywood. I mean, I could go into detail, but he was really good, did Dracula, whatever. After this came out, I think he directed only 4 more films after, with 2 of them being uncredited, with his final directing credit coming on the MGM Mystery Miracles for Sale in 1939. He retired with enough savings from his directorial successes to live comfortably in a pair of homes in Beverly Hills and Malibu until he died in 1962. I told that fact to touch on this fact that it found a new audience in the 60s, sucked in the 30s. 30 years later, people loved it.
So you could say it was a bit ahead of its time, maybe.
I guess. After its critical and commercial failure in the United States, Freak faded into background as a kind of Hollywood curiosity. It was banned in several countries, including the United Kingdom, because those guys are wimps. for decades. The film was licensed by distributor Dwayne Esper in the late 1940s and played on the Groundhouse circuit at various independent theaters. But it wasn't until 1962, Cannes Film Festival, that the film's revival finally began. After the screening there, it was heralded as a kind of forgotten classic. Noted film collector and archivist Raymond Rohauer picked up the baton from there, landing the rights to Freaks and showing it as a cult film. It gained prominence on the midnight movie circuit and found particular success with members in the 1960 counterculture movement who saw kindred spirits in its cast. Facts are done, bitch. Sorry.
So one thing that I found really interesting was the whole thing about how the movie was originally 90 minutes, and then there was such a backlash from the early screenings that they cut a bunch of stuff out and added some stuff and then re-released it at only 60 minutes.
Yeah.
And
I was cool with that, though.
Yeah, no, I definitely don't hate a short movie. Yeah. But I was very curious as to what had been removed, like what was in it that was so, because the movie feels very tame by today's standards.
Yeah.
So I did some reading about that.
Oh, okay.
And it turns out apparently the scene where they swarm Cleopatra in the woods towards the end was like a lot longer and way more graphic. Yep. Like it showed them really messing her up a lot. So the whole thing where like in the beginning everybody's standing around the cave or the box like looking in and the guy's narrating, and then the part where it comes back to that at the end and then it shows her like in that box, that was a thing that got added later as a way of like cutting out what had previously been too gruesome to show there at the end, but then still show like the end result.
Smart move.
Yeah. And then another piece that they cut out is that there apparently was also a scene of them castrating Hercules.
Yeah, I read that too.
So, you know, a little more intense than the final product all around.
Well, and the film supposedly ended with him singing falsetto.
Oh, that's funny.
That was it. That's what I read. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so there was definitely some much more intense and grotesque and horrific scenes in what those original audiences saw. That is not the version that we watched. I think that watching this movie now, a lot of it just is kind of like quaint. It, like you're just tossed in the middle of this traveling circus sideshow, and the movie is putting you into a lot of day-to-day interactions between the performers, and there's like a lot of drama, but a lot of it's kind of like tongue-in-cheek or a little bit funny, and there's not really anything scary going on. And in fact, I think it's like deliberately not scary. Like I think that a lot of the movie is just trying to show you the human side of the characters, which is kind of weird. You know, if you think about the early 1930s when this was being made, and, you know, kind of back to your point of even the cast made some of these people sit in a different place to eat dinner, I could see that being like a mind-blowing thing or like a really weird thing that no one else would do to just show like the human side of those people.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of the main concept of the movie, was that Hans didn't like being laughed at, you know, and wanted to be considered normal. Yeah.
Yeah, and so kind of going down that road, I think it's really cool that they had actual performers and that it was authentic, actual people portraying that segment of the population that wouldn't really have any representation or be shown as human, you know, in any other light. But because of that, you know, because they got actual sideshow performers, we weren't seeing a lot of world-renowned acting performances in this one. It was not the worst that we've seen, especially of movies on this list, but it also, you know, some of it was just silly. It was like caricature kind of oh shucks type, you know, 30s movie making.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that with like Ferosa. Yeah. But I actually thought Freda did a pretty good job. out of like all of them, I would say that like her acting was the best.
Yeah, her phrasing was a little weird on some stuff, but
It was definitely weird. But looking at her facial expressions when she was like
yeah,
saying the things that made, like, I felt like, oh, that's like a natural
yeah.
thing there. But I mean, the phrasing's weird because I felt like it was just because it was a 1930s movie. But
I just felt kind of weird that she was in love with the Gerber baby.
Hey, was he really the Gerber baby?
I don't think so.
Daniel. That was also her brother.
He looked like it though. Yeah. But yeah, so on the whole, for the most part, I think this movie is a lot more interesting to read about than it is to watch right now.
I agree. I spent more time reading it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in 2019, having watched the movies that we've watched, and the whole history of filmmaking having brought us to a point that's much more advanced than this, but it really was like an early effort at tapping into something that is kind of foreign and different, and it's something that's resonated a lot. I mean, it's been referenced in a billion things over the years.
Yeah, and I mean, it's strange because, like you kind of talked about at the beginning, like, I mean, it was like in that in between era with silent films, and it did seem like this was more racy than what you would have seen at the time. Like, you saw a guy like get stabbed, have a knife thrown, get stabbed, and I don't know, it just seemed pretty intense for the time.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think this movie got more intense than Frankenstein did, for example.
Oh yeah.
And two, I think that maybe the balance would have been different had that other 30 minutes been left in.
Yeah.
I think that, because the whole ending sequence I really enjoyed. From the point where they're having that wedding dinner for Hans and Cleo, and all the people are around yelling, "One of us," and passing around that big cup to drink from, and then Cleo has her freak out. See what I did there? And she tells them all that she thinks they're disgusting and that she's not one of them, and she calls them like disgusting, slimy freaks or whatever. And they all just kind of walk away in shame. But then from that point forward, I thought this movie got awesome. I loved all the scenes of them just standing around, like, creepily staring at her in silence. And so, like, it would be her or Hercules, and then you'd just see one of them in the background, like, underneath the wagon or something. And, like, something's coming. Like, that a line has been crossed. And all of that, kind of joking entertainer portrayal has gone away and been replaced by something really menacing and creepy. And, you find out that they're planning something for that night. And then the circus is on the move, and it's raining and storming, and several of the people are there in Hans and Cleo's wagon, and she tries to get them to leave, and then all of a sudden the knife and the gun come out, and there's the fight between Hercules and Froso, where Froso he gets held down on an oven, and then they descend on Hercules with the knives, and then that when they were all down, like, in the wet mud crawling. Like, that was such a good, like, visual. And then that group chasing Cleo through the woods, it didn't show what they did to her at all. But then it cuts back to the present day, and you find out that's the thing that they were not showing you in the beginning. And you see her all, like, cut up and disfigured and squawking like a chicken in that box. And it's just kind of a satisfying ending. And I just really thought, like, from a horror perspective, that whole sequence still stands up.
No, I could not agree anymore. I mean, I think, like, I almost think I like this movie more because of what we watched recently, but I actually really enjoyed it. I mean, it was kind of right up my alley as in being a short film.
Yeah.
But then, like, it was freaks, and so it's like, okay, hopefully this movie's not just to showcase, half man, half woman or something.
Yeah.
And then it gets to the wedding, and then that's when shit hits the fan. Mm-hmm. It's just unfortunate because it's only like 7 minutes long, or like 10 minutes long maybe. Yeah. But you see, like, Hans, like, spit out the poison, like, he was getting poisoned by Cleopatra, and it's like, oh, he knows. And then next thing you know, you have the smaller people on the train, or in the stagecoach,
Mm-hmm.
like just pull out a knife and just sharpening it, and then and then just pulls out a gun and starts cleaning it. It's like this is the coolest gang I've ever seen in my entire life. I was but in reality, it was super creepy. I think was it Hercules that was walking back, and that's when all the people were standing under his stairs that were staring at him. Yeah, and so like that naturally just creeped me out as well. Being stared at like that. I also touching on the loss or the footage that they cut. I also read that they lost it, that it's never gonna be seen.
Yes, there are no like copies of this still out there anywhere that or have the original cut. So yeah. But yeah, and all that said, I mean, like I'm glad that we watched it, but I wouldn't necessarily call it scary, even just because that last part was kind of satisfying. Like they spent.
That's true. That's a good point.
They spent the whole movie making you like emphasize with the performers and not like Cleo and Hercules. So when they got what was coming to him, it was just kind of like, like you were almost cheering for the bad guys or the horror villain type person, but they didn't really feel like villains. So yeah, it just from a movie that I would watch and feel scared. I wouldn't really put it in that category, but I do think that it's a horror movie, and I do think it's a good horror movie.
I mean, yeah, I definitely, I would definitely put it in the same category as like Frankenstein and Dracula.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of funny that like, because I felt the same way where I was like, hell yeah, they got what was coming to him, just Hercules, his ego, like he's a small guy, he's not gonna do anything kind of thing.
Yeah.
He definitely got what's coming, but I also think it's kind of funny that they weren't like, I mean, Hans straight up was like, he just kind of fucked over Freda.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And it was just like,
cold
okay.
as ice.
Yeah. He was like, I only have eyes for you, and it's like I wrote down at that point, oh man, Hans is a goddamn player. And then I was like, oh wait, you fooled me too, Hans, you son of a bitch.
Yeah.
And then also like it's just a strange time. Obviously the 30s were a strange time, but like there's the scene with the Siamese twins when like one of them's getting married.
Yeah.
And like her fiance is just like super belligerent.
Yes.
And it was just kind of like a normal side story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I think he referenced like hitting her a few times, and I think he was serious about it.
No, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
It's like, what the heck is going on here?
Yeah, and I was kind of curious if that storyline was going anywhere, because it seemed like it was definitely building towards some kind of larger conflict.
Yeah.
But I think what I ended up taking away from it in the end was that all that time that it spent on showing like the disagreements and the affairs and the romance and all of the, kind of backstory type stuff was just to show that even though this group of people had their differences and arguments and, just normal issues you'd have if you were out traveling with a bunch of people, when it really came down to it, they knew that the other people were all they had, and so they would band together and do absolutely whatever it took to protect the group. Mm-hmm. And so by her like establishing herself as not part of that group, it really just sort of solidified, I guess, their unity, which was kind of an interesting twist.
Yeah. I do want to touch base on another thing.
All right.
That guy lit a cigarette with his mouth only.
Yeah. No, that was crazy. And there was another
impressive
dude right there that could have helped him, but no.
I'm like, what? But I didn't want him to. I was like, oh, there's no way. And like, he even looks at the camera kind of when he puts it, and it flips the match around, and it's like, oh, this dude's got it. It's like, how are you going to do that? Box of matches going to move? And then he puts his chin on it. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
This dude just lit a cigarette with his mouth.
How long do you think it took him to figure out how to do that? Because that is some determination. How many?
15. My guess.
All right. That's on our next bonus episode. We'll have a contest and see who can
who can do that.
Yeah.
Yep. I want to know who rolled the cigarette for him. That's what I was wondering. I was like, who's the asshole that rolled it but wouldn't light it for me?
Right. Well, he probably like crawled over and pulled it out of somebody's pocket or something. The handless pickpocket. No one would ever suspect him.
Yeah. I also thought it was kind of. I guess I can't continue. I'll get canceled.
And that's how he got kicked off the air.
I know, it was getting close to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, we made it. And you know what's crazy? Thursday is Halloween.
Oh, yeah, I know it.
So this is going to come out, I guess, the Thursday after because we do it a week ahead.
Okay.
But like, we're like right on Halloween's doorstep, and it has not at all felt like it. You know, like being here in Austin because it's warm.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I feel like I've not given Halloween its proper attention this year, and I probably should have watched even more horror movies.
Yeah, that's a shame. That's all we've been doing. It's watching horror movies, or Katie watching her horror, or not horror, but Halloween shows, like cooking shows and stuff. It's basically been Halloween focused this whole month.
Oh, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
It's Halloween themed. Do they make pumpkin spice vape juice?
Probably.
Because if not, I feel like that's $1 billion industry.
That's probably $1 billion. Yeah, you're right. Until the FDA makes it legal.
I mean, but that's why there's the internet.
That's true.
And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com, or feel free to comment on or message our Facebook page. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.
Can I say freaks?
Well, I mean, that's what they call themselves and what the movie is named.
Okay. All right. You said it. Daniel said it.
You'll notice I didn't actually say the word.